my advice to everybody is beef up your business development, right? Get with a consultant. You have some pretty good folks on Rent Scale that can do this. We have Biz Dev Mastermind. All those are working together. I think they go hand in hand. They're like Burger King, McDonald's, honestly. I think they work, in pretty good synergy together. But hire somebody, create that business development machine, and watch the leads start to come in and make those closings, right? Get that business.
I don't throw darts at a board. I bet on sure things. Read Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Every battle is won before it's ever fought. Think about it.
Welcome to another episode of the Profitable Property Management Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Muela, and I'm here with Brad Larson today from Rentwerx, PMM Con, and a bunch of other stuff. You always got something new cooking. Brad, welcome to the show.
Appreciate you having me on, man. Glad we got to do the last minute invite. I was walking around the vendor booths downstairs and I just had a wild hair. I said, hey, let's get on a podcast and talk about a couple things. And you're like, yeah, let's do it. Come up at 5:30 in the morning.
Not quite 5:30.
Not 5:30,
but yeah, sometimes you got to be flexible to jump in the opportunity. I'm glad you came and snagged me. So there is some good stuff to chat about. And it's been a while, but for those that don't know, you're thinking, man, there's nobody that doesn't know. But for those that don't know who Brad Larson is, give us a little bit of background on yourself.
Sure. So I've been in the property management space about 10 years. I own a property management company in San Antonio and now Austin. We're able to get in a couple acquisitions. So we manage about 1,100 homes. We have, 38 employees, and a lot of those are remote. So we're big on the remote team members to assist in our management day-to-day functions. And so really with the help of Melanie Thomas, she's my key CEO person, the business runs itself and it allows my mind to run wild, and we get to build other things like a property management mastermind conference that we put on every year. So that's going to go on again, the fourth iteration in March of 23 in Nashville, right? On Broadway. That's going to be a super fun event. And then we got a couple other things cooking as well. And those are the big ones, like the podcast I do, of course. You've been on that show several times. And it's a fun little, thing that's going on there. And it leads into
what's
other
the name
things.
of that show if people want to check it out?
Property Management Mastermind is what it's called. And we also have a really good Facebook group, 11,000 plus members now in that group. And there's great resources in there. If you ever need a question answered, you could pop in, ask a question, and you'll get 10 answers pretty quick. So it got a few things cooking in the fire, they say.
Always staying busy. So let's talk a little bit more about your background from the Midwest, collegiate athlete, former service member. As you reflect back on your upbringing, I'm always curious on what it is that disposes certain people to become entrepreneurs and to get into business. I'm hitting you fresh here with this question, but if you reflect back, is there anything in your background or your upbringing that you think disposed you to become an entrepreneur?
Being poor was one. No, I always
that doesn't do it for everybody, brother.
Yeah, I know it doesn't, but my parents are both school teachers at Catholic schools. And so they don't pay anything, right? And so we basically lived pretty poor. Like I just remember I was so frustrated to not have, even money to go buy batting gloves for your, for your baseball. And it was just, that's kind of what motivated me to do some of this. And, this is rinse and repeat. You hear this a lot, but I remember being handed a book when I was at the infantry captain's career course at Fort Benning. It was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And some really smart dude from Vanderbilt. He was like, hey man, you got to read this. So this is back in 99, 2000, whatever it was. And so I read it. And of course, just like everybody else talks about in Bigger Pockets or wherever, it changes your life. It puts you in a different direction, puts you in a different mindset. So that really kind of turned the corner for me to go from that servicing, I'm going to stay in the military until they kick me out type of scenario to like, okay, I got to go do other things. This is way more exciting to me.
And your start was on the brokerage side?
So essentially I left the military and moved straight to San Antonio and got right into real estate sales and sold homes for 10 years and then formed a management company in roughly 2011.
And what made you want to do that?
Another good story there is, so I was at Keller Williams. It was 2008, had a great year in 2007 and went to the team leader at Keller Williams. I said, how do I really take this to the next level? This is a one-on-one meeting. And how do I get this thing cooking more? And so in between text messages with his head down, he looks up and says, hire an assistant. and looks back down and keeps text messaging. And I just was blown away. I'm like, that is my key to success, is hiring an assistant. And it just irritated the you know what out of me. And so I left. I'm like, I'm out of here. And I left Keller Williams. I started my own brokerage because I had my broker's license, and just kept building and building and building from there. I mean, I remember telling people my first address was a UPS box, right? So it was on Stone Oak Parkway in San Antonio, Texas, which is a big street. And so you look at it on a business card, if you remember business cards, and it said Stone Oak Parkway, right? And so people would think you're big time. And I was really just managing out of my house, and you start slowly and you build it and build it and build it. So it really helped me kind of refine and hone in on the business development process of what property managers do, because I built the business from kitchen table presentation to kitchen table presentation, just more and more and more over and over. But the selling side, as you know, it's a roller coaster, man. I mean, you could have a great year, bad year, great year, bad year, but
it's happening right now.
Exactly. And as soon as you take your foot off the pedal, you're slowing down. And so there's never any real, it's not a real business. No offense to any real estate agents out there, but it's not a real business. You can't turn that thing around and sell it when you're done. It doesn't run itself. I know there's a few exceptions, the teams, I get it, but you know what I mean? It's just not, it's not a quantifiable business like property management. And so once I really started to learn the value of this recurring revenue in our industry and the way you can build it out and build the procedures, it just really was a fit for me.
Now, were you pretty clueless from day one starting PM company, or did your 10 years in real estate give you a meaningful leg up?
It gives you kind of a base, right? You understand how to work with people. You understand how to sell. You understand homes. You understand how things work inside of homes. Because in the beginning, you're doing everything. You're doing maintenance. You're doing accounting. You're doing everything in the beginning until you are big enough to hire out. But yeah, it does give you a good base. And of course, it really gave me a true understanding of the selling side, because that's a big piece that I think is missing in some management factions, is they don't have the understanding of being able to selling the real estate homes. And so you and I talked about that pre-show. It's like, this is one way to potentially stop that dreaded C word that we always hear about, the churn word.
And some folks are intimidated by the brokerage side, which is always interesting to me to think about being intimidated by a new skill that's actually an adjacency. Skills in general, like magic tricks, once you know how to do it, it's really not that complicated. In your case, you came from brokerage, you get into PM, you're coming up in the business. What were some of the mistakes that you bumped your head on? What were some of the rookie mistakes you made early on?
There's so many of them. It could fill a book. I remember Bob Walters from Australia. You know, he was a 30-year, property management guy, right? I visited Australia and hung out with him quite a bit. He came to my conference, and he always said, because I used to listen to his presentations. This is before podcasting, right?
And you've told me a story before, but how did you get a hold of these presentations? It was like pre-internet.
Yeah,
pre-internet
it really was.
Broadly.
We're talking CDs. Like, he would put these out on CDs, and I had a connection through Todd Breen. And he introduced me to Bob.
Todd Breen, okay.
Because he was going over to speak quite a bit over there to Australia. But anyway, kind of to get back to your question, it could fill a book. He would stand on stage and say, I can fill a book. I can talk your ear off about the mistakes I've made. A big one that you've heard of always before, coming up is trusting too many people with your money, because, things can kind of go south pretty quick. So you have to take the Reagan mantra of trust but verify. And so that's one of the mistakes. The other one, a little bit simpler way before that, before you start getting to that point, is how do you design your business? Like, do you go flat fee? Do you go percentage? How do you differentiate yourself between your competition? And so there were some mistakes that were made. I mean, heck, I was changing the pricing model like every 6 months to try and find that sweet spot. And so, of course, hiring mistakes, you hire the wrong person and they waste your time and money for a long time. There's just a lot of things you learn coming up. Great example. Let me hone in on an exact point. We're trying to hire a business development person in Austin. And so we're looking at resumes. We're trying to find a full-time business development manager. And one of the resumes I came across that our team was kind of excited about was a person moving from a different market into Austin. And I took one look at this person's resume. I said, no way, because as successful as that person looks, they're moving from a different market, and they're going to treat us like a launching pad to get their next gig. So they're going to be in my faction for 6 months, and then they're gone. right? Because you start to learn, you get the spidey sense of what those team members are going to be like after you've been burned once or twice before.
Intuition.
Yeah, intuition. And you just can't teach that. It has to be brought on by experience. And so that person could have been a great hire, but I just thought, nope, they're gonna come in, they're gonna treat us like a launching pad, suck up a salary for 6 months, and then they're gonna find the next better gig and they're out. And so that's just stuff you learn along the way.
So you mentioned the trust accounting. I took what you said as like trust accounting irregularities, but let's just say that in general, there's a variety of ways that an unscrupulous staff member can cause problems in the business. This is kind of the soft, to some degree, hidden underbelly of the industry. I think of myself as somebody that's fairly well connected, knows a lot of people. That's something that I think nobody fully understands because people don't want to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
There's nobody here that's wanting to wave their hands and regale us all with exactly what happened to them. But on occasion, weird stuff does happen, doesn't it? What I see, Brad, is on occasion, people disappear. People we've known in the industry and have had some level of visibility just kind of go away. And then come to find out that's exactly what was happening, that somehow a staff member took advantage of them. They didn't have the controls in place, et cetera. Talk to me about the kind of controls that you're seeing as being necessary in order to keep a grip on that part of the business.
Well, we are money managers first. And so we manage property as a byproduct of managing money. And that's what one thing you got to take into your heart and your soul is like, okay, the money part is the most important part. We got to get it really right. Another side of that is lack of regulation on the state level. California, I mean, as much as people dog on them, they do it pretty well because they are super tight, restricted, and they can walk in at any time. And if you're not fully reconciled to the month, they could shut you down. And so that's forcing those managers to operate at a very high level because they know that there's an actual punishment at the other side. Other states, they are the Wild West. Some don't even require managers to be licensed.
Right.
And I'm just like baffled. And so I would like to see more regulation at a state level to ensure that those things don't happen.
Wow, this is interesting.
It is.
A pro regulation guy over here.
Yeah.
That's a surprise.
Yeah. And, I'm a hardcore capitalist, of course, but I'd like to see a bit more regulation on the manager side because our brand as property managers is getting diluted from the one-off leasing agent out there with you name the real estate company who's not making any sales that month, and they just go out and lease a home. And what that means is they find a tenant, they air quote screen the tenant, they write a lease agreement on a state promulgated form, which is basically a napkin because they leave half the blanks unfilled. And then they're creating a document that could literally last decades. You understand? That thing could auto renew for decades. Next thing you know, the owner's, embezzling the money from the tenant. They're not paying their mortgage. The tenant gets kicked out. All the bad scenarios can happen. But as property managers, they're giving us a bad name.
There's no sense of fiduciary in those situations. And in those, what's interesting is that there's a minority of people that actually take the position that regulation is actually good for the industry. I'm a free market guy as well, so I'm reflexively very concerned about regulation. But there's a minority of people that think that it actually clears out the riffraff. What types of regulation, like what's the fine line there? What types of regulation along those lines would actually be useful without encroaching into a place that would actually hinder the functioning of professional property managers?
Great question, because really, it's tough to define the fine line.
Of course, it's tricky.
It is. It's kind of that gray area. Like, do you consider what California does as intrusive, or is it, helpful to the actual professional property managers? Because me as a pro, right, with solid accounting, CPAs oversight, really good staff members, and processes and procedures, I'm like, yeah, bring it on. Come do your full cavity check on me anytime you want, right? But if you're not running like that, whoa, be careful, because in my opinion, those folks should be afraid and maybe they should not be in the business. There's again, the most dangerous animal in the free market is that one-off leasing agent that does air quote property management. Can they do it? Yes. Can they do it at a high level? That's debatable. And I think they're hurting the eventual customer and or the client. And so if you are a consumer advocate, right, that's what a lot of state agencies are posing as, consumer advocacy groups. they really should be looking out for the tenant. And in that regard, they should be honing in on who's causing the tenant pain. It's potentially the SMIPOs, as Scott Brady calls them, the self-managing individual property owners. It could be the individual landlords, the self-managing landlords that are causing that pain because there's minimal regulation. And so if you take the tenant stance, right? Oh my God, Brad Larson, he's now taking the tenant stance for, I'm sure people are like fainting and listening to this. But I do think that there's some fine line to protect the tenants with better regulations. And that's going to actually build our industry better. So the pros are going to win, especially going into this recession, because people are not going to be selling their homes. They're not going to be able to sell. And so what do they do when they can't sell? They go rent. And so where I'm going with that is I do think that there's a fine line. To answer what it is difficult because we're talking both sides of that spectrum where they could be super regulated where they have to have 15 different things in line before they can get a license. Or it could be, again, like, no offense to the state of Idaho, very pretty state, but you could just walk in and start doing property management without a license or anything. And so I think there's got to be a fine line to protect the consumer, which is the tenant.
The best and worst landlord that I ever had was somebody that I rented from 5 or 6 years ago, and he was a local leasing agent. So that part of the process was more dialed, but then I got in, and as a renter, it was the loosest process you could possibly imagine. No inspections, nobody came by. Rent, pay me when you can. I'm out of town, drop it off. If you drop it by the house, gone for weeks at a time. There was a couple month stretch where I couldn't send it to him because I couldn't take the physical check to his house. And so therefore he didn't even want to collect the rent. A situation like that is not good for anybody. It could have been more convenient for me in some ways, but it wasn't actually. It was weird and it was unhelpful. What you're talking about with the advocating for the tenant is a great segue into the other half of the conversation, which is part of what you brought up previous to the interview, and that is around fee maxing. We've talked about revenue optimization, which started with the seedbed being, how do we make sure that small businesses are running sustainable businesses that are strong to support the tenant, to support the owner, which requires cash flow. You have to get paid for what you do. There is no virtue in not making money because it's not sustainable, and eventually you'll stop doing it. As that conversation has matured, it's fairly mature now. This is not a new idea. There's been multiple iterations of it. Now we're on the backside, so it's beyond obvious, it's accepted, but now there's some conversation around what will this look like in a legislative sense. We've probably been through a full life cycle of monetizing on the owner side. Now it's come over more on the tenant side, and that trend is still growing. How do you think about the balance and the tension between revenue optimization that provides healthy profits that are appropriate and necessary to run a strong business, while also not getting into territory that is likely to attract the attention of regulators and to feed the already fairly aggressive and bubbling anti-landlord movement that has really sprung up and got even more steam since COVID?
A lot to that. We got to unwrap several things inside of that. So if what I'm hearing you're saying is, where's the fine line? That's kind of where I'm going with this. Yeah. So a lot of property management companies have fee designed maximization efforts towards the tenant and the owner and sometimes the vendors. So there's lots in that to unwrap. The first thing that pops in my head is days on market. Okay. So let's say there's real estate agent X with, whatever crappy brokerage that you want to pick on, and they're advertising a one-off home for lease, right? And they're renting that home in 21 days for fun. And then you look at a professional property management company, their fee max, they have resident benefits packages, they have application fees, they have leasing fees, they have renewal fees, they have, you name the fee, like we can go on, and their days on market is still 21 days. So if you start from that benchmark and go up, okay, apparently their market, the consumer says, I don't mind those because I see the value in that resident benefits package or whatever you want to call it. They don't mind paying the application fees because the apartment complexes have already trained them, right? That's a big part. These folks are coming out of college, potentially. They've been coming out of apartment complexes, and now they're going big time and moving into their now starter home, as Scott Brady called it. The new starter home is the first rental home a single family home. That's the new starter home. Okay. It's not the first home they're purchasing. The new starter is now the first home they're renting. And I firmly believe in that. So to kind of circle back on that, if the days on market is still the same, well, that's the ultimate benchmark. Because if our days on market were 35 and the individual real estate agent with no fees is 21, okay, now we got something to fix, because the market is saying that we are overpriced. And that's how you determine that, in my opinion. Now, the complaints and stuff, you're always going to get that. I mean, complaints to the boards, complaints to, the Google, complaints to the Yelp, whatever, for fees, whatever. There is a fine line within reason, of course, but I hone in on the apartments. And I want to say that again, because anything that we've created in the single family space has typically been copied from the multifamily space, and they're much bigger than we are. I wish I had the stats in front of me, but I would guess 4 to 1, as far as multifamily to single family. And so when they go in and they have a crazy high application fee, they have a mandated technology fee that they have to pay. They have a mandated, whatever policy they have to pay every month, a trash fee every month. They're really getting hit just as much as anybody else. And so they see some of these things and they're like, yeah, that's fine. At my apartment complex and wherever, I was paying 1, 2, 3, and 4, and now I'm only paying 1 or 2 in the single family home. I'm cool with that. So hopefully that makes somewhat of sense.
I think it's a great proxy. Days on market. To be honest with you, I hadn't really thought about that, but that totally makes sense. I intuit that is a fantastic proxy for how far people are being pressed. If you think about on the owner side, talk to me about your sensibilities around disclosure. What types of fees do need to be disclosed? Are there any fees that you think don't need to be disclosed? If I'm disclosing things as a general catch-all, now we're just back to a free market proposition where if you don't like it, you don't have to work with me. For somebody that's new in the business and is hearing about rev maxing, what would you say to them about what's appropriate with disclosure?
Make it worthwhile for the owners. Okay, so let me illustrate that in a point. If we charge a tenant a pet fee per month, well, how do we make the owner whole? Like, how do we take care of the owner? So backing up just a hair, let's talk about what we used to do 10, 15, 30 years ago. We would charge a pet deposit. Okay, a pet deposit almost puts the owner in more peril because of all the laws surrounding deposits, security deposits, pet deposits, triple damages, 30-day notices. All this other stuff that surround it per the property code in most states. So to get away from that, we just charge a monthly animal fee. And then the punchline is we make the owner whole with a guarantee. So here's a free animal guarantee of X. You can create your own 4-figure guarantee. And so the burden now is like a warranty on top of the management company. So an owner, all right, let's pretend I'm an owner. I'm looking at that. Wow, I get a 4-figure guarantee from this management company, or a 3-figure pet deposit that I'm now liable for with treble damages and attorney's fees to the state if somebody screws it up, or we misclassify it somehow, or we don't account for it correctly. Yeah, I'd rather take that 4-figure guarantee versus that 3-figure deposit, which I have to refund anyway. And if I keep anything out of it, the tenant's going to go ballistic and want to sue. So this is how that works. And that benefits both the owner, the management company, and in theory, the tenant, because they're used to it again from the apartment complexes. So hopefully that made a point, as far as illustrating that question.
In terms of the overall macroeconomic trend right now, you've made a couple of comments that are related to that. For example, real estate agents coming into the market, that has to be just right about to really foment in a significant way right now. What are you seeing as some early trends in the market right now? And how are you feeling about hopefully being able to retest this long-standing idea that our industry is counter-cyclical, which, to be honest, I've heard and taken as an article of faith for years, but I wasn't actually there in 2008. So what are you seeing and how are you feeling about this shift in the market?
Well, one, we are super excited about it. And so I don't mean to be a capitalistic pig on this one, but you watched Scott's presentation yesterday and it was all about the 4 things that are going to affect the upcoming trends in property management. And darn it, we're excited. We just had our quarterly EOS meeting and I stood up and raised my hands and said, gang, it's coming. The recession is here. So what does that mean? It means we have the potential to double in size. This is any management company. They can go out and get the business, right? That's the big number. We have 3 standing orders: provide exceptional service, get the business, and keep the business. 3 standing orders in our business that we really hone in on that kind of drives everything. With the pending recession, if it's not already here, we can argue that point, people are not going to want to sell. So if they have to leave their 3% interest rate, they're just not going to do it because they don't think anyone's going to buy at 8% interest rate. So that's one factor. The other factor is if they put the home on the market, nobody wants to buy. So they're like, well, we're just not going to put the home on the market. We're going to rent. Then you take into the other fact that there's more and more and more renters. The renter pool is skyrocketing. And so it makes a ton of sense to just go ahead and rent. And so you got all these factors combining to push people to say, I'm just going to rent this home or I'm going to stay in this home for whatever reason, which again shortens the rental pool and makes that renting home even faster. So it just all these factors combined. It's like a perfect storm coming together that I'm going to, go out there and say, we're going to have the best 18 months we've ever had. And we can super just double our business. And again, okay, the market turns and now everybody's selling again in 2 years. Great. Capture the business. Let's capture those sales. We've had them under management for 2, 3, 5, 10 years, and now they're ready to sell. Let's be the person that helps them sell that home and capture that business as a real estate sales brokerage. And so there's no downside to this. And so my advice to everybody is beef up your business development, right? Get with a consultant. You have some pretty good folks on Rent Scale that can do this. We have Biz Dev Mastermind. All those are working together. I think they go hand in hand. They're like Burger King, McDonald's, honestly. I think they work, in pretty good synergy together, but hire somebody, create that business development machine and watch the leads start to come in and make those closings, right? Get that business. And so I really am excited. I know I'm like going on and on about it, but dang it, it's been coming because, we've been struggling through COVID.
It's on the heels of it. If you look at the story arc of property managers over the last 5 years, arguably COVID had less bottom line negative impact than the sales market did. What's your take on that in terms of what was a bigger hassle for property managers? Was it all of the stress and the compliance of COVID, or was it the churn implications that came through this just white hot market that was there for a couple of years?
It was a accordion effect.
An accordion effect.
So what happened was all the sales and activity that would have happened through COVID did not happen.
Yeah.
So it kind of compressed it. And then all of a sudden it started to open up and then people just like shot through the cannon. And so it was like an accordion, a contract and expand. And so that really caused the sales market to almost double in effort. I don't know what the stats are on that one, but you can see how that could happen where, all right, we're just going to shut everything down and then, it's open. And so, look at Vegas. we're running around Vegas and it's a freaking, just nightmare around here right now because all the people have kind of been let loose. It's popping. There's people traveling. The place is just booming because there's all this pent up energy. And that was kind of the synopsis of what happened in that sales and rental market. And once that opened up, man, it really created just a huge exposure. And, we're in Texas, so we see, the mass migration is really, it's hitting us in a big way. You talk to people in Texas and Dallas and Austin, and they're like, it's all Californians are all moving to Texas. And, we get it, right? Because you and I both live in Texas and we get why, because we're, we love the state.
Great place to live.
Yeah. And it's that accordion effect again happened. And so it almost like depleted the energy a little bit. And so when everything, goes super fast, at some point it has to slow down a bit. And so now we're going to be seeing a slowdown. Interest rates have gone up way too fast. And so all of a sudden it's putting the brakes on the market. And then we have this class action stuff going on with NAR where buyer's agency potentially could go away. And holy cow, you talk about changing the landscape of what we do as property managers. Imagine thousands of realtors who can't make a living all of a sudden looking at our industry saying, we want to be what you guys are. Yeah, I can do that. I'm going to build that type of a company over there because the state has no regulation. So what the heck? What are they going to do to me? And so they're going to be stealing our market share a little bit, which again goes back to build that business development machine, bring those leads in, be the professional property manager, and beat those startups, right? Get into the business to where you can start to look better than those little startup guys. And no offense to them, we all been there, but they're going to be coming. And they're either going to leave the business or they're going to look to property management, try and make a living.
You make a great case for the professional property manager. You also mentioned startups. You mentioned little startups. Let's talk about the big startups. Let's talk about some of these bigger players that have come in the space. You and I notoriously had a bet years and years and years ago. This was 2017. There was a company that had come into the industry named Castle, and they were kind of the first wave. I think for both of us, it was interesting, novel, what's going to happen. And hey, I'm not going to miss a chance to take a fun bet with you. So I did. We wagered, and you were right. That company folded way faster than I thought was going to happen. But we've seen many more iterations since then, and enough time has elapsed. I'd like to think we know something. We don't know everything. We don't know how the whole thing is going to go, but we're a lot more informed than we were back in 2017. What do you think we've learned, and what do we still yet to understand about how it's going to play out for these big capital-heavy companies that have come into our space and are looking to roll up and do consolidation?
Well, we've learned that Wall Street has taken notice.
Yeah, absolutely.
The venture capitalists look at what we're doing, either Wall Street money, VC money, private money.
They want a piece.
They want a piece of this because they see the recurring revenue, they see the market share capture, they see all the benefits of this industry, and they see the rental market just booming and the need for solid rental homes. Because look at the stock market. It's just like taking a dump. Mm-hmm. And so people are running from the stock market saying, well, I would rather make a living in the real estate world, in the property management world, or in the real estate owning world. To do that, they need good property managers. And so there's been a lot of eye raising at the property management industry and a lot of money coming our way. The players that we see, we could rattle them off, left and right. They've all been pretty solid. They've all come in and done some good things. So I really don't say there's one better than the other necessarily. It just kind of depends on how they've gotten their money. We've seen a huge splash from big players that have come in and gobbled up a lot of the key players in the industry, getting that social proof. Mm-hmm. And so that's been pretty neat to see. But I think as a whole, it should be another exciting arrow in the quiver for property management companies existing to say, wow, I guess we're doing the right thing because people are looking at this as the place to go. And so we were the redheaded stepchildren 20 years ago. And, you get, I always remember that, right? Leaving Keller Williams and starting up a management company and the market's booming and real estate sales and realtors are running around and, they think they're unstoppable, right? And now, okay, they're going to be, delivering pizzas here pretty soon because they can't make a living as buyer's agents. And they're all going to be turning towards management. Now, I'm not rehoning that. I'm trying to go back to your question. The fact that the Wall Street money is taking notice validates what we do even more. Again, going back to, I think we need a bit more regulation to ensure that we're doing it correctly. So Wall Street will continue to believe we are viable in what we do.
So we have seen some companies, 2, 3 companies that have gone through the full life cycle. There's more than just Castle. There's a couple of companies that have gone through the full life cycle all the way to either straight up declaring bankruptcy or having a distressed sale. And there's many players still in the market. But maybe we're a little bit past the peak paranoia and concern. I remember a time where there was some real strong concern of folks thinking, hey, this new player is in my market. They're dropping fees. They're going to push me out. I'm going to get disrupted, et cetera. Do you feel like we're kind of a little past that peak paranoia and concern?
100% for me. So I'm in huge markets. San Antonio and Austin, they're huge, right? San Antonio is the 5th or 6th largest city or something crazy. It's huge. And if I heard one of those players coming into my market, if they're not already there, I'm just like, whatever, shrug my shoulders and say, there's plenty of business for everybody, right? We only have 20, 30% market penetration. So that means there's 70, 80% of the individual landlords out there that are still up for grabs. And so we have to look very, very good to attract those particular players. And again, as more regulations start to be infused, it's going to make our industry even more solid because those SMIPOs, those individual landlords, will look to professional property managers to manage their most valuable asset, their 1 to 100 residential homes or units, whatever they could be, multifamily, single family. So I don't freak out about that. And let's go back and illustrate a point. Renters Warehouse, right? Good organization. They were doing radio ads and people were just spazzing out. oh my God, they're doing radio ads, they're offering X per unit management fees and blah, blah, blah. Well, what they were doing was creating awareness. And
for the category as a whole.
Yes, for the category as a whole. And so people go do a Google search, property managers, your name, city. Like, oh, well, there's the Renters Warehouse radio spot that I saw. Look at all these other management companies out here. I'm going to call around. What is this management thing about? Because I got to move to Boston and my home's in Minnesota. And they figure out, well, there's options. Oh, this is really neat. Okay. They charge that. They do that. Oh, wait, this is a highly rated professional property management company, been in business for 25 years. I'm going to, give them a call. Okay. I like what they got to say. I hire them instead of the Renters Warehouse radio spot. Right. So I think that was an actual good thing. Mm-hmm. I hear those on the radio. I'm like, cool, get awareness up and going because everyone's still going to go and Google search.
You're right. And the category, as I think about it, particularly with Renters Warehouse, they were promoting the idea of, hey, you're moving, you don't have to sell. There's an option. And for a lot of folks, that really was kind of like yeah, I guess so. I hadn't really considered that. And so that absolutely transcends the fact that, Renters Warehouse is trying to pitch their services, but the broader awareness of the idea that if you're moving, which is, you made that point previously, for folks right now with the interest rate lock-in, et cetera, that's a big opportunity to say, hey, you're never going to get that rate again. You know it. We know it. I don't know if you're never going to get it again, but not anytime soon. Mm-hmm. This is the opportunity to put another renter in place. The adjacency to talking about these big companies coming in is to also talk about the big vendors in our space, particularly the property management software solutions. This ecosystem is very impactful for frontline operators, and there's been some shift over the last couple years. There's been some openness. There's been some new players that have come in as a result of the lack of openness. What are you seeing in terms of any shifts or changes in the ecosystem for property management software vendors?
Great point, because you are in that space as Lead Simple. We use Lead Simple. We promote it. We love it. Thank you for putting that all together. And the guys that run it, they're fantastic. To go to your question, I don't know if you want me to name software names.
Please, okay. Go ahead.
So, for example, AppFolio, great organization. They've been in business for a long time. We were prior customers. We use Rentvine now. AppFolio's now started to open up their doors or API to vendors to integrate with them because of the pressure of other companies like Rentvine who say, yeah, we can figure it out. We can do an open API. You have other players like Rent Manager. They're doing the same thing. Yardi Breeze is starting to get into that space. You still have RealPage with Propertyware. They're starting to do that more and more. So I think AppFolio, as a honed in example, started to see, yeah, there's other pop-ups out there or other big factions are creating their own software. That's been an interesting trend. And I don't know if that's wise or not. I mean, I can debate that with you, but you are seriously trying to recreate the wheel, and it's going to be very, very, very expensive. And no matter how much money you throw at it, you can't replace the experience that has gone into honing in a software, because a software is just not rinse and repeat from each one. There's so much to it. And I don't know the ins and outs of it that well, other than, I've looked at several softwares and, we transitioned a couple times from different softwares, but the ones that are out there are starting to see that, yeah, if we don't start to do what our customer wants, they're going to look for other solutions. And that little ticking away of every little lost customer is eventually going to hurt. I mean, I think at some point, those big organizations got so big, they just didn't care.
Complacency.
Complacency. They're just like, whatever, if you leave, whatever.
And where are you going to go?
Yeah.
And it's a pain to leave.
It's a pain to leave. They think you're very sticky because it is hugely painful to leave. Other companies started to pop up. Other services started to pop up to help transition them, right? So Anupai with their faction, they were helping to transition people from softwares because of all the data migration. That was a huge part of that.
I didn't realize they were doing that.
Yeah, they've been doing it for years and years. I would say a decade, and that's Planet Synergy. And so they were helping people to go in there and do that, because the old school way was you had to download all of that data into Excel spreadsheets and then upload it into your new software, which is a giant undertaking. It would take them, 2 weeks to do it, 8 hours a day from India, right? And so those services have become more and more. So the kind of the crux of all that is you have waning customer service, right? You've always heard that complaint from other softwares. You have the non-cooperation effort from having an open API, so I can use other great vendors like your company, Lead Simple. Property Meld is another one. There's ones out there that they couldn't use because there was no collaboration. And then you get into the fact that there's others are popping up. So you got these three things potentially pushing and pulling people away from those major software companies looking at other options. Let me ask you this. Let me ask you a question on your perspective. What do you think of these companies that are starting up their own property management software that's exclusive to them?
Interesting. Yeah, I think where my mind goes right out of the gate is that the cost of the R&D has to be spread out over the number of units that you're managing. So in the case of a large player, one of the top 4 or 5 PMS solutions, they have millions of doors. So whatever they spent to build it is spread over all of those units. If you had an equivalent, or even let's say a much smaller amount of R&D spend, but you're only spreading it over 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 doors, the unit economics are challenging. At some point, you still have the same motivation to resell it to third parties. So I've done my part. Let me kick it back to you. How would you feel about buying software from a competitor in your market? Is there some sense of conflict of interest? In my mind, I would be sympathetic to that perspective.
Well, I don't think it's been done before.
It hasn't been done.
Yeah.
No, but what's your immediate gut reaction if another player that's servicing doors and has BDMs and is doing advertising is also attempting to sell you software?
I wouldn't have a problem with it. You know, if the software was good and it worked, it's fine. Okay, now I'm done. All right, let me think about that a minute. I might be backtracking. Okay.
That was a pretty quick answer.
Here's the other situation is now they have access to your data and they can start calling your owners. They can start calling your tenants. They can take that data and use it for their own self-serving interests. Okay, maybe I might have a little problem.
It probably gives you some pause, at least some reflection.
Yeah, a little bit, right. And we see a lot of that in parallel for the accounting companies. There's several accounting companies that have come out and they get access to the company's data. And then all of a sudden they potentially own a management company in that same market all of a sudden.
Legitimate concern.
Legitimate like acquisition. It was, you know, there, but now all of a sudden they're doing the accounting for a management company in their own market. And so, yeah, you might have a hair of a conflict of interest. Of course, they would say no because they're professionals and non-disclosure agreements and all that stuff, but it doesn't make me sleep well at night to know that.
You know, the fact that I have not personally run a property management company has been an aspect of my career that I have embraced and been good with, but I've had that thought of, hey, you know, that'd be something to do for me. I've done a number of things. I've had a number of jumps. Why not acquire and manage a residential property management company? Just to have that background and to be even closer to it. That would give me some joy, and I like being the real McCoy. However, that very idea has absolutely given me pause. Somebody in my market, you know, how would they feel about that? In light of everything I've done and the positioning that I have in the market, I would understand if somebody would feel uncomfortable with the idea that now I'm competing with them directly.
Well, let's recap a conversation once that you and I have had in person, in a hotel room in Vegas, 3, 4, 5 years ago, surrounding the NARPM accounting standards. You know, we helped put that together. That was about the property management brokerage type stuff, like brokering property management companies, being a business broker, right? So we started that little faction and we have the property manager broker, but it hasn't gone anywhere and nobody's hiring us or wanting to hire us. It's not because we're epic fails. It's because the market is so dang hot for a property management company. You and I both know that if somebody wants to sell a management company, one Facebook post and they're going to get absolutely deluged with 10 offers that day. And it doesn't matter where it is. I own a property management company in Florida. Anybody interested in buying me? People from Washington State will contact them the farthest part away from the country to say, I'm interested, let's talk. And people will run these management companies remotely now. And so the landscape has completely changed. It is an absolute seller's market for a property management company, which is another reason these are so great to get into. So if you wanted to sell at any point, I say it over and over again, it's a Facebook post away and you have 10 offers.
I think this is actually a good thing. As I've processed on this further, the liquidity options that are in my mind peaking right now, you're hearing the same thing I'm hearing. Valuations, my sense is that valuations have peaked. And if we're talking about getting a high cash offer for your business, great. I'm all for it. So I'm in favor of that liquidity being an option for owners. Now, that's a different proposition than getting rolled into another entity and having more of a strategic proposition on their destiny. But if you're just looking to cash out and now you're getting a 2x revenue offer, awesome.
Yeah, I don't think it's peaked yet.
Oh, you think we're still?
I think we're still going up in the management world.
Okay.
So, for example, I've started a campaign that I'm really honing in on in San Antonio to buy more management companies there, buy more accounts. And I tell everybody, I can pay more. I will pay more because it's more valuable to me than one of the 4 or 5 big players that we could rattle off. And they're going nationwide, right? Because I could come in and just do a tuck-in, right? That whole term you've heard before. So where I can absorb that straight into my already infrastructure in the San Antonio, Austin regions, and it's worth more to me. I can do owner financing and pay more. I can do straight up, cash you out and pay more because I think it's worth more. So am I driving up the price? Sure. Do I think it's worth it? Yes. I understand that those are worth it. Parallel. What is a SaaS company going for? Stupid margins.
Yeah. 10 times revenue minimum.
Right. And it's the same recurring revenue business model in a certain sense, right? So why aren't we there? But we could be.
There's definitely increasing awareness of the value of these businesses. I want to pivot to talk a little bit about events. You and I, many years ago, when I was running PM Grow, we had talked about your event. PMM Con was an idea, was a concept, and then you did it and you scaled it up. I, by contrast, got out of events, had a great 3-year run. And for a variety of reasons, including the fact that my partner left the business, it was just time for me to kind of exit at a high note. And I had a great time though. I enjoyed it. And that was meaningful to me that I was able to have that arc. I would love to riff with you. What have you learned about running events? It looks glorious from the outside. When you're in it, it's a grind, but it can also be deeply fulfilling and rewarding. What's been your experience with PMM Con?
Man, you may have to bleep a lot of this out, but first off, the hotels are just awful to work with. They are just so dang expensive. The last event was at the Red Rock in Vegas. Awful organization, the Red Rock. I would never, ever go back there. They completely effed over that conference in 100 different ways. And that's been one of the biggest challenges. And you think you can do your due diligence and you can shop around and you can look at different hotels, and the dates are always a struggle to get with. The timing of everything, it's just a difficult monster to put together, but it can be a lot of fun. It's not a moneymaker for sure. I think the PM Grow conference decided to cease fire on what they were doing. I think they bailed out of that whole concept because it's just not a money-making event.
It's a slog.
It's a slog, and you're competing with other entities that don't need to make money, right? They can put on a conference that they don't care if it makes money or not because they have a big treasury behind them to help push it forward. And that could be any organization. You can rattle 3 or 4 off in your head. But for what we're doing at a private level conference, the fine line of having that balance of a really good kick butt event and then ticket prices, right? And then you got speaker fees and you got all these different things going on. We're going into our 4th iteration, so it's never perfect. We have great spreadsheets and we have great budgeting and we have a great lineup for the 23 version. But what I've learned is the hotels are the make or break. Like they can make it for you or break it for you. Another great example. Okay. I like to give examples, right? It's one thing to give you all that fluffy stuff I just talked about. I'm going to give you a hardcore number example. So the Grapevine faction in 21 in Dallas, the Grapevine Resort. I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong. The Gaylord, excuse me, in Grapevine. They were awesome to work with. The conference-wide internet fee was $2,000. Okay. The Red Rock, they come in, they want to charge us $13,000.
Ouch.
For the same conference-wide Wi-Fi fee. And we couldn't do it. We just didn't have the budget. We were already, short. And so that's one quantifiable difference between hotels, but you can never tell me there's a difference in the Wi-Fi provider. It's just they were getting so much out of that. I mean, in the hotel in Vegas. And you can see what they're doing here. We were down there at the vendor faction yesterday, $12 for a Miller Lite, $16 for a glass of Chardonnay. And you're like, come on. So that's part of it is the hotels are just, and don't forget the gratuity built in for the conference organizer, 23 to 25% on top of that. And so it just gets so ugly and expensive. And don't feel sorry for me, guys. Honestly, I'm not asking for that. I'm just trying to illustrate a point that the hotel can make or break the function as either a lose money event or a break even or make money event. And if you make money, it's not, FU money and you're retiring on a desert island with your yacht. It's just like, okay, you made a little bit and then you pay taxes on that. So it's not a money-making event, but darn it, it can be fun.
Oh, I want to communicate publicly that when I was running PM Grow, what the distinctive for me was how much effort I put into curating speakers. And I did that in the contrast of what I felt was a real neglect in that area, which I could understand because it was and it is a real pain. And when you were setting up your event, I didn't know what it was going to be like, but it became very obvious to me that you were working just as hard, if not harder than I was, to curate the content. I have very little appreciation for folks who just take the same familiar names, do the same layup. Every time you run one of these, there's a list of people that want to speak at the event. There's a list of people that you can just rattle off a list of names and then boom, you've got your speakers booked. That doesn't cut it. That's not what people came for. To run a good event, you have to hustle. You have to find new people, new concepts, new angles. You need to get told no a lot because they're interesting speakers that can't come. They're not interested, whatever. You've put in the work, man. I really respect the way that you've curated the content. I know what that takes and I respect that.
I appreciate it. One of the things that we try not to do is a panel. I'm not a big fan of panels. IMN, for example, they run their conferences. Panels. It's all panels. And they just regurgitate a bunch of people on stage and say, talk about something for an hour. Good luck. Magic can happen out of that. And it can go the other way really quick with no content, no real structure. Just like, anybody got any questions? Crickets. And it's just an awkward thing to put up. We really do try to hone in on what people want to learn about. So for example, in the podcast, I was telling your crew pre-show that a lot of our podcasts, we just interview vendors because it's self-serving for Rentwerx. I want to know what they can do to help Rentwerx first. And that's going to help the other property managers out there by learning about my discovery conversation with X vendor. There's always new ones coming in. So that's how we hone in on it. But the conference content, our big thing is to do the masterminding. Right. That's been the Property Manager Mastermind Conference. So we really hone in on that with good facilitators. And they go into these conversations at length in a group setting, 30, 40, 50 people, and they just mastermind the heck out of a certain topic. And again, that's where I think a lot of the magic comes out of it. But you got to have a good facilitator to drive that conversation. Otherwise, they can go off the rails pretty quick. Our agenda this year will be, down almost to the minute, right? We also hone in on giving the vendors a lot of time. So all of our breaks are 45 minutes. All the lunches are 90 minutes. We have an evening buffet for the vendor function. So no one's going to have to leave. At some of these factions, you go and you do the vendor mixer. Well, here's your finger food, here's a drink, and people are starving and leaving by 7:00. Well, this way we're going to feed them so they all stay and the vendors get mass interaction. To make a point, that's where people learn the most is talking to the vendors. Wouldn't you want somebody talking to your lead simple crew for 2 hours? How do I do this? And how do I do that? Okay, I've really learned about this. Okay, now I'm ready to jump in and sign up and get into it, right? Same with rent scale. How do I learn this, Jeremy? What do we got to do? How is it going to work? Okay, I'm in. If they're just there for a drink and a snack and they got to go to dinner somewhere, it doesn't give you, the vendor, enough time.
I love it. I want to end here. The industry lost someone special this year. Who's Kevin Knight to you, Brad? I know you knew this guy well.
Yeah, Kevin. Wow. Kevin Knight was my mentor. He was a super good friend. I spoke at his service. We were in business together and just a fantastic guy. So I'm going to tell a couple stories that I told during his service. Is when I first got into NARPM, this was back in 2012, 2013, you fill out a form and a mentor contacts you. Well, right away, I filled out the form. Kevin calls me the same day. And he's a competitor, right? He is 10 miles away in his office. We're all working in the same market. He's a competitor and he's super chippy and cheery. And he goes, hey, man, let's go to lunch. And so, he he took me to lunch and just offered up anything that we needed to build out the processes. And today I would do the same thing, because I think if all of my cohorts, my peers in San Antonio or Austin are doing the same thing, we all look better as an industry, and it raises everybody up. So Kevin was taking that stance long before I understood it. And so he really was a super mentor in that regard. Another one is when he thought, okay, Brad, I like what you're doing. I got to get you into speaking. I'm like, why? I'm busy building a business. I got young kids. I ain't got time for that. It's like, no. We'll get you doing. I'll get you a gig in Australia. His voice, right? And so, dang it, he did. He got me a speaking gig, my first one ever in Australia.
Was that when we went to Australia together?
We were all there together.
Wild.
That was my first ever like on stage speaking gig, other than like a small little NARPM faction 6 months prior. And so that was my first main stage gig, and it went pretty well. I mean, it went really well, and he got that gig for me. But I gave him a bit of hesitation because, to be frank, I was struggling at the time with finances. I mean, we were at that tipping point where we were at 100 doors, 150 doors, and at 1 minute you're maxing out your credit cards to make payroll. The next minute you make a few sales, and you're like, okay, I got money this month. I mean, it was a seesaw there for a bit. And I gave him that little bit of hesitation, like, oh, I don't know if I have the money for that. I didn't even say anything. And he's like, no, I'll pay for you. I got frequent flyer miles. We'll go together. I got you covered. I got your flight covered. That's what I said. I said, holy cow, are you kidding me? I'm like, yeah, okay. I guess I can't say no. And then they paid me, whatever, $1,000 to speak over there, and gave me a free ticket. So I couldn't say no. And that was Kevin's doing. And so we traveled together to Australia, and it was all because of him believing in me. And he's just a fantastic guy. And so it was a real tragedy that he lost his life in a scuba diving accident in Florida. This would have been 3-4 months ago. And it kind of shocked the world, because, he was young, vibrant, had a great life going on, was super happy. And all of a sudden it struck him. And so it kind of makes you realize, okay, I have gone back to my attorney and said, all right, I need to make sure my estate planning is rock solid, because I don't know if his was. I don't know anything about that stuff, but that made me concerned. It's like, oh man, that could happen to me anytime. That could happen to anybody. And so make sure your estate planning is rock solid. That would be one piece of advice. And Kevin was a fantastic guy. He was surely missed in this industry,
100%,
and left a big wake in his absence.
God bless the givers. That's what it makes me think. They say the meek shall inherit the earth. Kevin didn't have a big ego. Kevin wasn't trying to flex on people. He was out there trying to help and contribute, and what he gave came back. And to me, he's one of these guys that really embodies the spirit of service.
Another fun story there is Kevin was notorious for the hangers on. And so what that means, you know how people get together at these event conventions and they go to dinner? Okay, we got a table for 8. Let's all meet there. And then Kevin would show up with 2 or 3 new people.
Always bringing
all
more
the
people
time.
I love it.
It was great to meet him, no problem. But it's just like, dang it, Kev, we had a table for 8. Now we need a table for 12, because he brings 2 or 3 people with him, because he just invites people. He was just a really good guy like that. And so you can't be mad at him for that, right? But I just always remember that we'd always tease him, because you'd be talking to somebody in the hall. Hey, we're going to dinner. Why don't you come on? Yeah, we're going to meet over here. Let's go. And he'd bring 2 or 3 people with him that we didn't plan on, and not trying to be exclusive or nothing, but just like, okay, now we need a table for 12. We're waiting for a half hour.
Love it. That's some great reflections.
Yeah.
Let's end it there, man. Thanks for coming on, Brad.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Jordan here, asking you, what do you got? What is a question you want to ask me? Can you stump me? Can you throw me something hard, perplexing, vexing, something you feel tied up in knots with? Throw it at me. I'll do my best to try and answer that question, to dissect it, to parse out the nuance, and maybe help you get a bit more clarity. I'm looking for questions as the basis for creating content, and you're looking for answers as the basis for clarity. And wouldn't it be perfect if those two things matched up? Drop a comment, send me an email, jordan@leadsimple.com. Let's stay in the conversation. Peace.